a lot of times after an athlete loses, they'll say, it's just like, I stopped playing my game, right? They started playing the other person's game. They got caught up in how the other person's playing and started to try and compete with them in what they do. And they come back and they learn their lesson and say, oh yeah, right. I got to remember to keep playing my game. But that's a beautiful metaphor, an analogy for life too. How often do we get caught up in playing these other games that aren't ours?
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. All right, everybody, let's do this thing. What were we calling this? How you? I was like, there had a couple of different wordings for this one, but I think this is what we settled on, was how you want to play the game. And this one came out of a conversation about, there's sort of a way in which we can go through our life and look at it in the sense of a game. And sometimes we can look at it in a negative way in that respect. Like, it's all a game. It's all a stupid game. Hey, I guess there are a lot of stupid games that are out there and whatever. And to a certain extent, we are all involved in a game. Like you kind of don't really have a choice in the matter about whether you're involved in the game of life in general, and in the game of life, there's all kinds of games within it that are going on, games within games. And this conversation, as I understand, is just going to be about like, yeah, how do we approach that? How do we, what is our relationship to these games that we're involved with? How do we remember that the game is supposed to be fun, right? When it can be so easy to get to really get irritated and angry about the games that we might be involved in, or the games that other people are involved with that somehow we end up becoming a part of, there's a lot of there's a complex web of this that exists. And I think that my opening statement is probably a lot about like, yeah, there's perhaps more choice that we have in this whole sort of idea than we might think. And, and we often hear people say, it's just like, I'm not playing that game anymore, or I'm tired of this game, or whatever. And it's like, oh, sometimes we understand and claim this power that we go, oh, hang on a second. I actually don't have to play this game. Right? The thing is that it usually means that there's still some game that we're a part of, right? There's still some game that we are playing. So which are the games that we're playing? Which are the ones that we can drop? Which are the ones that we just need to have a reframe around because we need to play them, right? And how do we make those more fun? I don't know. I don't know where this conversation will go. I'm hoping there's going to be some surprises. Brandon?
Well, I like you use the word reframe, because I think that's a big part of the conversation, is reframing the game and looking at it a little bit differently. It's something that I've been trying to work through myself in my life, and realizing that sometimes I'm playing a game and I don't even realize I'm playing a game, and I'm taking the game too seriously, and my filtering or perception or framing of it is just off somehow. And then it makes it hard to play the game, or the game becomes uncomfortable, or becomes painful, or it's just not fun, And you mentioned something before we ever recorded, was just like, yeah, remember, it's supposed to be fun. And I think like you can look at a lot of things and you go, well, yeah, I'd like it to be fun. Like, I think a lot of the time when we think of a game, we often think, oh, why would we play a game? We play a game because it's fun. It's like a natural end point or starting point in some ways. It begins and ends with fun. It's like, why are we playing at all? Why are we playing? Why is there a game? But I think we play these games and they're not fun, and we don't really know why we're in them. And we're like, I don't want to play that game anymore. It's not fun. I don't like playing it. And sometimes the game, it starts to, someone's playing it and you don't like the way they're playing it. And so then that's not fun. And there's like manipulation or something going on, or you feel like they're cheating at the game, or it's like, they're not playing fair, or in like, you're not, like, it's not fun to play with this person or these people or this group or this whatever. And so I don't want to play anymore. And, I think what's interesting is, like, we're talking about this in relationship to art. And I think art is often an expression or communication of the game in a way that kind of helps us to see it and appreciate it. Like the game of attraction, for example, just romantically, is such an interesting game because, like, we have markers for what is attraction, like what is attractive. And in different cultures, we have different markers. And across all cultures, there are similar markers that tend to stay true, but if you go from culture to culture, there'll be different markers of what is actually attractive and what isn't. And if you look at different times in history, like, for example, if you look at, like, if you in the 70s, when there was like the hippie bell bottom type of things, could be very attractive. Whereas, like, we might go through a phase where that looks silly. Or I remember, like, in the 90s, like, we wore baggy pants as guys. Like, it was weird because that was attractive, and in a weird way, like, if you wore baggy pants, you were kind of considered kind of cool. And, now I just think it looks stupid. Like, I'm just like, I can't believe I wore any of that crap. You know what I mean? And loose clothing that, like, didn't show your form at all. And in fact, it made everybody kind of look a little dumpy. Like, when I look back at it, I'm like, oh man. Or I remember, like, in the 80s, I was a real little kid, and we would, like, a lot of people wore these very, like, high vis colored stuff. And there's a joke, there's like a meme online. I don't know if people have seen it, but it's like this whole family wearing windbreakers, and it's like, man, in the 80s, we really had a fight against the wind, It's just like, but like that, like, there's stuff that's in and it's considered cool. And, like, that's all a game, right? That's all, like, are we playing the game? Are we not playing the game? And, and then the game gets old and we get tired of it and we move on, and trends move on. And, but I think what's interesting about this conversation is how perception plays into the game. And so I guess I'll leave with this one final point. Like, are you having fun, or are you taking it serious? And to, like, what degree are you taking it serious, and what degree are you having fun? And I think, like, to bring in Alan Watts, which we often throw into these conversations, he talks about, don't be so serious about it, don't take it so seriously, but take it sincerely. And I think if you want to play the game, you have to kind of be sincere about it. Like, you can't just be like, oh, nothing matters, I don't care about anything. Because there'll be a kind of quality to the game where it's not fun if nobody cares. But at the same time, if people care too much, then all of a sudden it's not fun either. And we're always, I think, trying to find this kind of, like, balance. And it's not just with each other, it's with ourselves. It's like, how do I play the game with myself in my own life? Like, how serious do I take my own problems in my own life? And, like, I think it's important to be sincere and to care about your life, but also, maybe life is a bit more of a game than we give it credit for. Anyway, there's a lot of things to get into. I don't know where this will lead either. I think it's interesting. But I definitely want to throw perception into our little mix of the game. Oh, one other thing. You also suggested a title, The Game Within the Game. And I'd like to get into that topic at some point too, because there are games we play within games of life. And it's very meta to some degree, but I think these are all interesting things to explore, particularly from a creative approach to how we look at life.
Yeah, you bring in Alan Watts. I was like, I was thinking about him too. just listening to you. It's like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about some things that Alan Watts said in this regard, and talking about even he brings up the example of like playing a game of poker, and even if you're only playing for like pennies, which for most places pennies don't even exist anymore. Like if you're just even playing for nickels and dimes, right? And suddenly you engage with the game with a little bit more sincerity. Like there's something, it adds a certain flavor, it adds a certain color to it than if you were just kind of playing and who really cares who wins and who loses. Even though playing for nickels and dimes is kind of like, well, who really cares? But you throw a little something into the ring, and it adds something. It adds I guess flavor is kind of the right word for me at this moment in time. It adds that thing to it. But my thing is, one thing I want to talk about is that there's this concept of like the zero-sum game, right? Which the zero-sum game, as far as I understand it, the idea is that there's only one winner and one loser, right? Like only one person emerges out on top, right? And this is kind of a notion that I think is a pretty, it's not honest because it kind of implies that there's just an end, right? That there's just a place where it stops. And life for the most part isn't like that, other than the fact that we all die at the end, which is right, which is like, so, but then that means everybody's in the same boat, right? So this notion of that these games that we are playing throughout our lives, right, that it is just a zero-sum game is, I think, untruthful. It's inaccurate and it's untruthful, because even in the times that we lose, right, well, the games carries on, and you can continue to carry on playing the game, right? Or picking up a new one or whatever. There's no end point to that whole thing. But there's can be something in terms of the seriousness that you're bringing up, like where things start to become no fun, where things start to become a real drag, when in the games that we're playing, is that seriousness comes out of, I think, zero-sum thinking, because that's very much a part of our culture, which is just like, I've got to be the best. Oh, somebody else is also doing this. Oh, there's like that. There's only room for like one person to succeed, right? Is just a broken idea, and it's not true, right? So I think that that's one aspect of this, how you play the game and how we are framing the thing that we're in. There are so many different ways in which we can interact and relate to the games that we're in. We can bring in an entirely new color, flavor, skill set, whatever it is. Like if you look at any team sport, right? You've got players who serve different roles, right? They're all playing they're all, in terms of what you're talking about, they're all playing a game within a game, right? You hear athletes talk about that. She's like, I've just got to go in there and play my game, right? And it's like, well, what do you mean you got to go in there and play my game? Aren't you just playing soccer, tennis, football, whatever it is? It's just like, but there's a truth to it, because they have a relationship. They start to understand. It's like, oh, this is the way that I play this game. This is where I have strengths. This is what I can bring to this. Is kind of yours, right? And I think that that's a big part of how we learn not to take the games we're in so seriously, help us to focus on the process of what we're doing, right? As opposed to getting caught up in a lot of externals, right? A lot of external pressures or what other people think, other people's opinions, whatever. You say, I got to go in there and I'm going to play my game, right? This is what I do, right? And that can take time to learn that, and it can take some mistakes and errors and failures and things like that in order to come to realize that, but that's part of that process, right? You need to have those, you need to take those licks, you need to take those losses so that you begin to understand where you fit, right? Because that's very often, again, coming back to like athletes and sport, a lot of times after an athlete loses, they'll say, it's just like, I stopped playing my game, right? They started playing the other person's game. They got caught up in how the other person's playing and started to try and compete with them in what they do. And they come back and they learn their lesson and say, oh yeah, right. I got to remember to keep playing my game. But that's, that's a beautiful metaphor, an analogy for life too. How often do we get caught up in playing these other games that aren't ours, right?
I have an interesting note on that. I agree with you. And I think like most of the time that's exactly right, is that because everyone's presenting their game and we get caught up in others' games. And sometimes I actually think you need to get caught up in someone else's game and stop resisting it and stop trying to stick to your game, because for whatever reason, their game is dominating the situation. A case in point that I can give you. So I played for this soccer team and we won the provincial cup and we were the best team in the league. Like we basically won every game, and the guys were incredible. And anyway, I remember we played this one team. They were shit. They were like bottom of the barrel team. They were like, they had no business even competing with us. And I remember like we were struggling, like the first half of the game, we were struggling and we couldn't really get a goal and it was like tied or something. I don't even remember the scoreline, but I remember coming in at halftime and our coaches, we had really good coaches. And I remember them talking to us and just being like, and I remember this so vividly because they were like, they're playing kick and run. And and we'd pass the ball up the field and we're all fancy and we pass it up and we get it right up there and we'd get close to a chance and then they'd kick the ball all the way down the field. And then we'd work it all the way back up the field and they'd kick it all the way down. And he's like, we have to meet them at their game. He's like, they're just kicking the ball and we're chasing it back down. So let's come back this half and we're going to kick the ball up the field and we're going to, because our coaches knew that we were fit, we were capable, we could handle, we could collect the ball without losing it from a pretty deep hit. And when you're young, that's a pretty good skill to have, right? Because a lot of players can't really control the ball. So, but we could control the ball. We can take the ball down and we can play it, but this is going to stop us from taking so long to work it back up the field. And we ended up winning the game by playing their game, by playing kick and run. And it was probably an ugly game, I'm sure it was. I mean, I don't know if I had the perspective back then to recognize, but kick and run soccer is an ugly, childish looking type soccer. It's just for like, but what for whatever reason it worked and we won the game. But I remember so vividly at halftime how our coaches were like, look, we're going to approach this because they're not going to expect it. They're expecting us to try to work the ball back up the field and they just kick it down. And sure enough, we played kick and run and we just overwhelmed them because they weren't fit as we were, and their team would get up to us and they couldn't get back. And we would just fucking break in and score a goal and score a goal and score a goal. I'm pretty sure we like pretty much crushed them in the second half, but we had to meet them at their game. And so I do agree with you. Most of the time in my experience of sports, you had to stick to your game and go, okay, well, what are we not doing right? How are we getting sucked into this? But in this one particular case, it was the opposite. And I found that quite interesting, just that you brought that up. It reminded me of that moment. Another thing is like, I was thinking as you were talking, I was thinking about relationships and how, I don't know if you've ever been in a relationship like this, but you can be in a relationship and it's really nice and you guys just get along and you never really fight and it's just almost seamless. But then you can get into a relationship where it's like you're at each other's throats all the time and you're just fighting and you're like bickering and you're arguing and it's so fucking dramatic. And that's a game sometimes, like I've been in that game where I'm like, I'm tired of this game. Like I'm tired of this drama. I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. But in a way, that relationship could only thrive and work under the drama. And no matter how much you tried to calm it down and like steady the waters and do whatever, that person functioned under drama. And I found that sometimes you can't make people play the game you want to play. And for whatever reason, their game, because of the nature of it, just wins. It just has the edge on your game. So if you stay in that relationship, it will continue to be a fighting, conflict-based relationship, and that's how it will work. And maybe there are people out there who are relationship coaches who can say, well, no, you could do this and calm it down. Well, maybe. I'm not saying there isn't. If someone has that ability, I think that's really cool. But my experience of it is there often when people want drama, they tend to manufacture it. And they just find something to get dramatic about. Like I remember one time I made some analogy about a dog thing, and the girl that I was with was like, "Are you calling me a dog?" And I was like, "I'm not even talking about you." And she's like, "I can't believe." She's just like, "Holy shit, where are we right now?" Like you just took some story about a dog thing and you made it about you. And it was just like, all of a sudden I'm trying to defend myself about how you weren't even involved in this analogy. And they were like, "You called me a dog." And I was like, "Holy shit, where are we?" You know what I mean? And it's just like, now you're on this back foot of your defensive, and you don't even know how you got sucked into it. And it might have been a pure manipulation. It might have been totally, and in hindsight, it probably was. But the thing is that when people want to create drama, they can. And I do think that, when we look at this, like, what game do you want to play? It's important to be able to recognize the game that other people want to play around you. And you have to decide, like, hey, look, if I'm going to be in this environment, this is the game that everybody seems to agree to be playing. But if I might need to remove myself from this environment and find a new environment. And I think this can be difficult because sometimes we're in a relationship or a friendship or a group of friends, and we really care about these people. And we really and we don't want to leave them. But you have to understand that sometimes the dynamic of certain things only work under chaos. And that's the game they play.
Totally. And, I think you're sort of implying a very important element to a lot of this, which is, where is the love? Where is the passion in the thing, right? Like, because if that's not there, then, you should get out of the game, right? Like or sometimes you just need to remind yourself of why you got into whatever game it was in the first place. Because there's always going to be challenges in any game that you play, right? That's part of the fun of it, right? But there can be certain situations where you're like, wait a second, this like, yeah, I know I want to play this game, but I don't want to play this game within the game. I'm not into doing this thing, right? Which just goes to show, I mean, relationships like dating and stuff like that is a great example of the multitude of games that are within games. Like, there's as many games as there are people, right? Like, you could probably find some general ones that are across the board, but yeah, there are some couples who, I mean, it kind of boggles my mind, but they thrive in that thing where they can just fucking, scream at each other and then work their shit out and then go out and have a great time or something like that. I'm just like, like, I can't, that's not for me. That's not my kind of game. I like the game of like, hey, like, we're upset. Let's take a walk. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk to each other in a certain kind of a way. And to some people that's boring. They're just like, oh, but like, to me, it's just like, no. Like, that's just in terms of my makeup as a person. That's the kind of partner that I wanted and needed and all that kind of stuff. And thankfully I found a partner who's for the most part, that's the game they want to play too. Right. And not wanting to like scream and take each other's heads off and whatever. But, this is something that we were talking about before we started recording, which is that, I think we often can become, I guess, victims to, the game, right? That we've built up in our heads, right? Like there's this game that's going on and I'm just getting fucked by this game. And, to some extent there are people who, like they control the board, right? In certain games, or they have a lot of influence on the board. And so I don't want to deny certain aspects of that, but to a large degree, especially within our close circles, within our communities, right? I don't think you often find a lot of that. That's all kind of like big sort of shit. Those kinds of games that there's not really much you can do about. But in terms of your community, right? Your family, your community, your circle, your circles, right? There's a lot that you can do within that. Like there's a lot of there's such a multitude of games, and you're not actually just sort of the victim of everybody's games, right? And to a large degree, I think that that's where it's the most important to a certain degree. And this is almost a bit of an aside, but I think that we can get so, it's not even an aside. I think this is actually very relevant to this whole thing, because very often we can look at sort of like the world political, stage, or however you want to view that, where there's just, all of these huge pieces that are in motion, and it feels like you're trying to stand up against a tidal wave, right? And that's not a mistaken feeling, I don't think. But then when you actually look at it, it's like, but wait a second, how much does this actually affect my life day to day? Not that it doesn't affect your life, but in terms of your, like, for the most part, like your meat and potatoes day to day kind of life, how much is this really impacting? And truthfully, I think it's very often not very much, right? We are most impacted by the things that are just going on within, our workplace, within our families and our friends, and just our communities. And I think that if we focus more, we place more of our attention and focus on that, we start to find that, we have all of this agency, we have all of this capacity, we have all of this potential, and all of these roles that we can fill, right? That when we're looking at the bigger picture, it can just feel like you've already been swallowed up and disappeared, and the potential for you to have an impact in the game seems like negligible. But we often find, like, I was listening to a guy named Paul Kingsnorth, who has a very long and what's the word I'm looking for? Illustrious? Illustrious. There we go. That was the word. Thank you. History within, like, the environmentalism, and basically saying, like, most of these, we used to think that we can come up with this big giant global solution to the environment and environmental problems. It's like, and the truth is that it comes down to small communities. It really comes down to things that you do at home, right? And all of these small groups kind of adding up to have a big effect, right? Because a big sort of global solution doesn't exist, right? To a certain extent, it comes down to these close circles where you can have impact, right? Because otherwise you are kind of powerless to a certain degree. So, in terms of, the games that we're involved with, right? Like even in something like dating and relationships, right? Well, you're probably dating somebody within your community. You're probably dating people within your own community, right? And there's so many different types of people and so many different kinds of games and things that and interests and stuff that we're all, can choose to participate in, not participate in, and that we have a lot of choice in that kind of a thing, because those choices don't really have giant, like, earth-shaking stakes to them, but they can have really big impacts on our own life and in others.
Yeah, well, I went and lived in a few different small towns, and before I did that, like I used to kind of think that small towns were generally the same. I was like, yeah, people are probably like, it's a small town, everybody's just more friendly, they know each other, and it's like this couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, the thing is every small town had its own little character, it had its own little personality and its own little feel, and there were elements of small town life that were the same across the board, but they were not all the same, and they didn't all have the same feel. And what I realized as I was going through that journey of kind of, moving out of the city and wanting a bit of a smaller town feel was that I needed to kind of get a feel for what it was that I thought I wanted. Because I think this is part of playing the game in life. In the beginning, before you know anything, everything is very generalized. You have these ideas and these theories about how things are and how they work. And I think this is the problem with youth trying to change the world, is that youth often works from generalities. They work from very theoretical ideas that are lacking experience and lacking interaction. And, and the part of the challenge for a young person is that they have their idealism because they haven't confronted sometimes the limitations and confines of the real world. It's nothing to say against youth, because I think youthful idealism is something that older people love. Like we appreciate it, and we kind of, it's inspiring, it's like, yeah, and maybe sometimes every once in a while they can sneak through this kind of idealism that, you forget as you get older, and you go, yeah, we need to recapture that. Let's bring that back in. But I think that, listening to your elders as a youthful person is a valuable thing, and not just listening to anybody. We had that talk at one point about there's elders and there's older people. I'm not talking about just listening to someone because they're older. I'm talking to listening to somebody because they're an elder, in the sense that they're looking back and they're trying to share something with the youth and guide them and give them advice based on their experience. And at the same time, don't just listen to an elder just because they position themselves as wise and knowing. Really kind of consider that and filter that through. But, in the way that this is kind of, every generation played a game, So you're in a game of your generation. That's another thing. The boomers, they lived in a certain time where you could just work a job where you kind of broke your back to do the job, and you could buy a house and you could have these things and you could have all the nice things and you just did it. And that's kind of how it worked. And the economy worked that way. And the game was very much about materialism and setting up that kind of American dream. And we had this image of it. And today's day and age, there's this, we're hanging on to that game of the American dream, and it just doesn't work the same anymore. Inflation's fucking 4 times what it was. A lot of the people have 2 jobs. They're not even making enough to pay for their basic expenses, let alone save, let alone buy a house, let alone have children. So the game has just changed, and it can sink you into this experience of well, what's the fucking point? And then it just can lead to depression and mental health and all these type of other things. And that can get very serious. I'm not undermining that. I think the thing is that we have to sometimes be aware that we're trying to play a game our parents or grandparents played that isn't relevant to us today. The game is just not the same anymore. And I think one of the problems that every generation faces, not just our generation, but every generation throughout history had to face, was that the game changes from their parents to their children, and especially from the grandparents to the grandchildren. And the problem is that parents and grandparents are often trying to project their version of the game onto their children. And they're saying, well, just go to college and work hard and you'll do fine. And it's yeah, but that doesn't work anymore. It's not it does work, but it doesn't work the same as it did when you were younger. So what you're projecting onto people just doesn't really kind of equate anymore. And then you have this divide. So you have young people and older people who are kind of butting heads, and the older people are thinking they know better, and the younger people are trying to communicate that, hey, it doesn't work. And the problem is you're getting this miscommunication. And like, if you can kind of understand where people are coming from, you can take it less personally. This is a big thing that I'm learning as I go through life, is just that people will give you all sorts of advice, but you have to consider the source, and you might not understand where their advice is coming from, but their advice is coming from a perspective and a time and a game they're playing. And you have to ask yourself, you want to play that game. And I've had to rework the game that I'm playing, because I take a lot of advice from people who were like, I don't know what we'd probably in our culture consider successful. So like wealthy, a lot of status, good position, whatever. And I looked at that as okay, well, that seems pretty good. I want that in my life. And the problem is that game, on the surface looks good. But then when you get into the game and you start to look at how the nuances of the game work, you start to go, well, I don't know if I like this game. People who are using each other, people who are cutthroat, people who are kind of their values are kind of fucked up as considering like what I think matters, and they're willing to override kind of like being a good person to like get ahead. And and I'm not saying everybody's like that, but when you start to play that game, you start to see, hey, I don't like this game. But on the surface, on the onset, my looking from the outside in towards it looked pretty good. But now that I'm inside it, I'm like, ugh, I don't like this. And I found that in the film industry. I'll just share some. This is a little ugly, but like when you start in the film industry, or at least when I did, I shouldn't say when someone does, but when I started, I was just like wide-eyed and like, oh, let's just make great movies and shows and just fucking put the best work for it, and the best actors will win and the best directors will get the thing. And then you get in there and you realize, shit, man, it isn't about the people who are the best. It's about the people who know these people, and it's about people who are sometimes compromising themselves. And then, as I got into the industry further and further, I started to see the insides of it and the ugliness and the manipulation and the power abuse. And then, and you tell people and they wouldn't believe you. And then all of a sudden fucking Me Too happened. And then the fucking Harvey Weinstein story started coming out and stuff like that. And people were like, whoa, I didn't know this existed. And I'm like, that's what I've been fucking trying to tell you. Like, but like people who were really in the film industry, who were really like having a career in it, a lot of us saw this shit and we couldn't tell anybody. We couldn't communicate it to anybody because there was this great image of the film industry being this fucking magical thing. And now I feel like the veil has been pulled back for a lot of people, and people are seeing it and they're like, and I wouldn't say that it's just the film industry. I say there's lots of industries that have this type of veil pulled back, and you realize, hey, this isn't what I thought it was. But I think that's why people don't always understand. It's like you look at someone playing the game you think you want to play, but you have no idea what it's like for them in that game. And, like listen to Gwyneth Paltrow's story and her having to deal with Harvey Weinstein. And you look at that and you go, well, she's a really good actress, very successful, has done really well. But like, look at the game she had to play. Look at the fucking bullshit she had to go through. And she's just one person of many. And you think about all the people, and she's probably like the tip of the iceberg. It's not even nearly as bad as some of the other people have experienced. And you think they have it made, they're playing the game, they're living the dream. And it's like, you have no idea, because yeah, they're getting some of the things that you want, but you don't know what that internal world is like and what their day-to-day is and what they had to do or deal with or confront or draw boundaries with to try to navigate this fuckery that was going on the other side. And so I think, idealism comes at it from the outside looking in, and reality is the inside looking out. But I think we need both a lot of the time. And if you're going to stay in something like the film industry, and if you're really going to get into the belly of the beast of it all, you somehow need to retain that youthful idealism that started, and at the same time have that kind of character and wherewithal to not be compromised on the belly of the beast and the inside. And sometimes you just go, well, you know what? I'm not even going to play that game anymore with those people. I'm going to go off and do my own thing. And I think that's why you see more now, not just because of technology, But more now you're seeing independent film productions and more foreign films and people who are like, look, I don't want to be a part of the beast of this system anymore. These people aren't in control anymore. Let's go make our own shit, and it's a different game. But yeah, there's not as much money, and yeah, you can't win an Oscar doing it. And good luck, right? It's not about that anymore. Now it's about a different game. And, maybe it really comes down to like, well, I really want to make a good movie, as opposed to like, I want to win this award and get recognized by all these people.
Yeah, knowing, figuring out what it is that you really actually care about, because very often you find that, there's a game that you're in because you really love the thing. And then you find that when you get into it, there's games within that game that you really don't like. Right. And when you meet that, there's any number of things that you can choose to do. You can completely get out of the thing, or you have to find a new way to play that game, or maybe you can actually find a way that it's like, oh, actually, I don't need to play this game within the game, right? And maybe there's a consequence to that, but it might be worth it, right? Something that you're willing to accept. But yeah, like the whole thing of like, yeah, like if you're in the winning awards game, the thing that comes with that is a lot of shit that you might not want to have to deal with, right? Like a lot of kind of like, I remember hearing about Ryan Gosling back in the day. I think he was nominated for Half Nelson. I mean, this is going back a while. I don't even remember when Half Nelson came out, but there was this whole thing where I remember hearing that he was refusing to campaign. Like he didn't want to campaign for the award. And I remember hearing about that, as a young actor and being like, what? Like what? I never heard of this idea before of an actor having to campaign for the award. Cause it's like, well, isn't it just, people, they make the things and then they get noticed and they go, wow, what a great performance. And,
right.
And now you're gonna like, and the best person wins. And it's like, well, that's not, like, don't get me wrong. Like you have to do good work, but there's more that's going on than that, right? When you get into some of these things, and which is why, I would advocate more. It's like, just care about doing good work. Yeah. Like make that the thing that you're passionate, not winning awards, but just doing good work, because that's something that you can actually be involved with. That's actually something you have some control over, right? Like you control what you're putting into something, right? You don't control what people are going to say about it and whether they're going to say, yes, we approve, here's the award, or no, right? Like, and it's, so there was something else I wanted to comment on in what you were saying, the dark side of sometimes the games that you don't want to play, and the choices of like whether we can drop them or not. I mean, oh yeah, it was about, sometimes like the gift of running into these things sometimes of games that you are not great to play is that they often are, from the artistic perspective, from the artist perspective, is those are often the times when you have to get creative, right? Like I was just thinking in terms of, you're talking about that sort of white picket fence kind of dream, right? Like, yeah, you got the house and, and whatever. And that, how that thing has changed. That game is no longer quite the same. Like it's still there, but it's like who can play in it is, has become a little bit more exclusive, I guess, for lack of a better word. And that has opened up all kinds of things for people, like for younger people coming up, right? And we're like, well, that game doesn't really exist for me anymore. And if I wanted to play that game, the demands of it, the games that I would have to play within that in order to have those things is just not worth it for me, right? So suddenly people start getting creative and they go, well, who says that I have to live in the city anymore? I can do my job from fucking anywhere.
Yeah.
And some people just travel. They're traveling all over, and they work remotely everywhere that they go, or they have the capacity to move to some place that's, maybe a bit more rural, but it's like they're surrounded by nature and beauty. I mean, hey, here we are in the Sunshine Coast, right? Like we're not too far from the city, but we're in a smaller kind of area outside of a big city, and like there's so much beauty and nature here and stuff like that. Hey, we're doing this podcast right now. Like there's opportunity still, and there's ways to be creative in the face of it and open new avenues and opportunities. And sometimes it takes running into some hurdles, running into some speed bumps, or just flat out some games that you just don't want to be in, that it forces, some creativity to go like, okay, I don't want to do this. I can't do this. So now what do I do? Right? What are some other ways for me to live, right? To live a life where I'm, because ultimately, what is it coming down to, right? A life of joy, a life of meaning, a life of calling. Like these are all things, that not just artists, but like everybody is kind of, we all desire, right? How do we do those things? How can I fill my life with more of these things of joy? And we start to find ways to do that, right? And it's sometimes messy, but there's always unexplored territory, and we hear stories of people who say like, this is what I did, and then suddenly it's like, whoa, this person just blazed a different kind of trail that works. Right. And now suddenly there's a new game that we can play, that is one that can really help a lot of people, that can really be a source of enjoyment and richness and whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, things change, right? And the game changes with technology. And I remember, like, I grew up in a time where, the digital film was just becoming a thing, and we were moving out of like film into digital, and it was a big thing, as a filmmaker. And it was exciting because all of a sudden, you could pick up a camera and you could make a movie, which previous to that was not really accessible for a lot of people. It became more and more accessible. And one of the problems that came with digital film was that because everybody could make a film, it became harder and harder to sort through, like, what was good, and what was quality and what wasn't, and things get watered down, and technology changes everything. But it decentralized filmmaking ultimately, and I personally think that that's good. So we went through these ebbs and these flows, where the technology wasn't really good enough to compete with film, and you weren't really a real filmmaker if you made it on digital. You were only real if you made it on film. And then there was a time where it was just digital was just better than film, and it just made more sense, and the quality was on par, if not better. And then you had the old school filmmakers saying, no, if you haven't made it on film, you're not a real filmmaker. And the new digital filmmakers, which were coming more mainstream, were like, it just doesn't make sense anymore. It's like, let's move to digital, and they could just do more. And then soon the technology just outdid film, and now film is like, no one uses film anymore. It's just kind of like gone, right? It's like a lost medium in a sense. But what was great about the technology of film moving is it decentralized filmmaking. And now film was very expensive, but digital was relatively affordable, and really anybody could start making film. And it's not even film anymore. We call it film. But anyway, the technology boom in filmmaking exposed the abuse of power that was going on in the the golden era of the film industry. the problem with anything is that you get people who come in and then they begin to exploit it and they abuse it. And the golden era of film, as it moved from the golden area to the, silver screen. And then now it's like, almost like movie stars are almost disappearing now. They're not even, in a way, they're almost kind of fading away. They're not as much a thing anymore. We are moving and evolving in our approach to this medium of art. And it is still a really new medium. That's the thing that people often forget. It's probably one of the ones we consume the most because we all have like variations of like Netflix, Amazon, Disney, or whatever, some type of streaming thing. And we, have TVs in our house, and a lot of us have multiple screens in our house. And the thing is that we are moving away from what it was in the beginning. And it only started in like the 1900s, like the early 1900s, like in the 20s, really. I mean, maybe technically you could say arguably before, but like, we're splitting hairs at that point. The point is that where it started and where it is now, it's only really been like 100 years. And we've had a lot of changes and a lot of evolutions. And now people are watching things like YouTube and TikTok and, Instagram videos, and they're down to these really short videos where the medium used to be locked into like this, it wasn't even 120 minutes. And initially it was like it was almost like a play. Like you would go for like a 2-3 hour thing with an intermission. It was like, and before that it was like silent film. I mean, things have evolved so much in the medium of how we play that game, right? And I think what's important as an artist is that if you want to get into artistry, you have to understand that the art has the technology to it. It's going to change. The sounds that we want to listen to in music are going to change. There was the day of rock and those like bands, that would dress up in a certain way. And it was a like iconic time, but like that time is kind of past, the rock star period has evolved. It's changed. It's different. And so maybe it'll come back in certain ways, but the game just changes and you need to change with the game. And I do think that there's a certain kind of nostalgia we have for games where we're like, I just want to play that game. I really liked it when we played it. And it's like, yeah, but that game just isn't relevant anymore. Like we played it. And like you look at, I think comedy is an art form. Comedy changes. They say every 5 years you basically run into a new comedic medium. This is very, very difficult for comedians to survive a career longer than 5 years. And if you look at through most comedians, I'm talking about the majority, not the ones you probably even think of, they had probably a 5-year career and then they faded away. And they might be somewhere in, the fringe now, but they're really kind of out of the mainstream. But there are these comedians who adapt and they evolve with the comedic times. And it's a game, because what we found funny, like in the 90s, a lot of people don't find funny anymore. What we found funny in the early 2000s, sometimes people don't find funny. And yet, it's all just a part of like evolving with it all and like seeing that the game grows and we grow and we change. I do think it's like understanding that we look at things differently. Like we just don't look at things through the same lens that we looked at them at the time. I was thinking about this, like Monopoly, right? Was probably the biggest board game at a certain time. Like people don't really play Monopoly on a board anymore. Like, it's like a very rare that people would. But Monopoly has been trying to rebrand themselves through technology. And they've been, because they were such a big brand of a game. And so they're trying to modernize themselves and make it interactive and make it for, people to kind of want to play. But, that whole idea of building a Monopoly business was a much bigger thing, I think it was like the 80s and the 90s, right? Like when that was like a really kind of fascinating idea. Whereas now people aren't as interested in that anymore. And now the game's just not as relevant. And so I think, I don't know. Here's a curveball, Evan. I'll just throw this on. But a relationship, the game of a relationship changes as you get older and go through the decades of your relationship, or maybe even just the years of your relationship. But like, you know, it might have started off as you were just youthful and in love and you're like, we're having fun and we're on an adventure and we're doing this. Eventually, maybe you have kids and then you get into this new season of your relationship. And then eventually you're going to become older and your kids are going to move out and things like that. And if you manage to maintain the relationship for this duration, you're going to evolve and change as a couple. And there'll probably be core things that are still the same, but there'll be a new way of doing the relationship game that you're in, right? And hopefully you guys manage to change together in your game. Because I think that, you know, what's problematic for some people is that they both change, but then they change away from each other. And then the relationship doesn't work because they don't want to play anymore together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely time and age, like, is it kind of forces us to play new games, you know, and that's a good thing, you know, because like there's something that's bizarre about watching somebody who's too old trying to play, you know, like that, you know, it's like, yo, man, like you're 50 years old. Like, what are you doing in this club full of 20-year-olds? Like this, like, what are you doing? And yeah, and there's different, you know, that like we're sort of forced through that evolution. And I think that we can go with it willingly. And sometimes we fight against it. Right. But like, it's an inevitability. There's a wisdom to moving with those changes and recognizing it, even though sometimes that can be tough. There can be a kind of grief that can come with it. Like becoming a parent, definitely, you know, that's not something that a lot of parents talk about, but when you talk to parents about this, most of them totally connect with it, where it's just like, yeah, there's this grief of like, whoa, my, like, even though, you know, because it's one of those things where everyone tells you, it's like, oh, your life is going to completely change. And, you know, it's, the reaction is, I would say, usually one of two things. You go, is like, yeah, no, I know it's going to totally change. Except you don't really know that, because you haven't actually lived it or experienced it yet. Or you are one of those people who's just like, no, my life's not going to change. I'm going to keep doing exactly the same things and blah, blah. Like, there's like a denial of the whole thing. But like, you know, when you have like a small child with needs and that you're the person who has to meet them, right? Like there's no getting around that. And that you have to let go of. It's like, oh wow, that game of being able to just do whatever kind of I wanted to a large degree when I wanted to, just being able to, you know, oh, I'm just going to go and do this now. I'm just going to, like, that's that part of your life is gone. You've like, that game doesn't really exist for you for this period of time now. Like, it comes back to you later, but that's kind of gone now, and you're involved with a different kind of a game, right? And you need, and making that sort of transition is an interesting one, right? Because there's a lot of really wonderful things in that new game, right? But yeah, like there's a lot of things that you might have liked about the old one that you didn't realize were going to go. It's like, that can be tough. That can be really hard to make that. So, but it's something that I think is important, right? Again, having these new challenges come up and new, just having these new games enter into the fold that present new challenges is an important part of how we, I think, grow as human beings. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think we should wrap this one up, and unless you really want to, or can you keep it for closing comments? All right. So we've definitely had this one on before, but it's a really good one. We're drinking Peach Bod today from Parallel 49. It's called a sparkling peach ale, and it's great. It's a good one. I've always enjoyed this one whenever I have it, and so I knew it was going to be kind of a winner if we drank this one. And I don't know what else to say. It's a good summer one.
Yeah, it's good. I'm sure I said it was good before. It's I always like things that are infused with a little peach. It's mild. It's mostly it's almost like, to me, it's like almost like a light ale, or almost a lager with like a peach infusion, which is mild. And it's nice. It's good for like a summer cool down beer, and it's pretty tasty. I could probably drink a few, and they're just easy drinkers. And it's nice to have an easy drinker, We have a lot of IPAs, and it's just like, oh man, that's something. All right. Well, I'll let you close it off first.
All right. Well, I'll probably just be kind of like a broken record here and just say that yeah, like we're not as much victims to the games of the world as we think we are, and that indeed a game is, remember, a game, when we play games sort of in our life, like actual stuff that we think of as games, what is that all about? It's about having fun. Like, we do it because it's fun. And remembering that actually a lot of these games that we're playing, they are about us having some fun here, right? So if the game isn't fun anymore, maybe find a new game or find a different way to play in this game. Like, it's hard to, there's no hard and fast rule. If you've listened to this podcast long enough, you'll know that to be true, or at least you'll know that as something that we say a lot. We so much want and crave someone to just give us, like, look, just tell us how to do it. But, that's not really how life or artistry works, right? It's very much a thing that you have to be present with and responsive to, right? And that's the thing that's going to guide you and tell you which way to go, the choices to make, right? Is just through that kind of being present to your life. And that presence to your life is going to tell you about the games that you're playing. It's going to tell you about which ones that you do and do not want to play, what things are and are not okay, and how to respond to those things, which way you can take it. Is this something that you just need to completely walk away from, or is there just a slightly different angle that you can come at this with that suddenly makes it fun again, right? But it's about that. It's about the fun. Like the game is about the fun, and when it stops becoming that way, then yeah, take another look and get creative.
Yeah, I think it's really good to frame things through this idea of, is this fun? Do I enjoy this? Because life can get so serious so quickly and so easily. And, and I mean, people who argue that it is serious, I mean, they have a case in point. I mean, in some games, it's life and death. And, how much more serious can you get? You know what I mean? Like, it's, and the emotions are real, and they're hard to deny. And so I think it's okay to get caught up in the game where it gets a little too heavy every now and then. And I don't think that I don't think you made a mistake, or that you should look at it as like, oh, I'm doing this wrong, or I fucked up or something. I think sometimes things just get real heavy and they get really serious, and the game, needs to not be fun for this moment for whatever reason. And maybe there's something to learn in that, and that's okay. But I do think that we have to be mindful of the games that we've been taught to play. This is something that I'm working through a lot in my own life, is just kind of like how I perceive the world and the way I see myself and the way I see other people. And, and I think we try to understand the world through our own experience. And I think that is obviously, well, I think it's pretty obvious that it becomes problematic, because if you have some sour experiences, you can begin to filter the world through those sour experiences. And because we're designed, I think, hardwired for survival, the one bad experience out of 100 can become as powerful as the 100 we've had. And so I think it's important to put into perspective that bad experiences are not as consuming of everything as we might think. That's something that I've had to work through. We've talked a bit about this. Like if you've been betrayed, right? It only takes once. But if you've been betrayed before, it literally changes your reality forever, because you were functioning under a certain perception of trust. And then once the betrayal happens, that foundation is obliterated. And now you have to figure out how to navigate the world again. And people have a lot of difficulty with betrayal because you have to rebuild your life and reconstruct things. And it's very difficult because there's, same with trauma. Betrayal is a form of trauma, but other forms of trauma as well. Because what happens is you develop what's called hypervigilance, and hypervigilance becomes, I'm going to do it again, but now I'm going to make sure that I never get blindsided like that again, or I'm going to make sure that never happens to me again. I'm going to make sure I'm prepared. I'm going to make sure I'm ready, all that stuff. And the problem is now you're playing the game of being prepared. Now you're playing the game of being ready. Now you're playing the game of hypervigilance, which is just always be protecting yourself. And then that version of you that was open and willing to trust and willing to do things can't do that anymore. And so then what you've inadvertently done is you've cut out the possibility of true love or real friendship or pursuing your dreams. And so then you have to kind of go, well, like, is this game of hypervigilance and self-protection, is it the game I want to play anymore? And it's no one put it on you. You kind of like decided it for yourself, and you have to take ownership of it, and you have to kind of dismantle it and say, well, look, I'm going to trust again, and I'm going to love again, and I'm going to go after my dreams again. I'm going to risk again, but I'm going to be wiser, but I'm also not going to be armored up so much either. And that's the balance, And I think when we start at life, it is easier in certain ways, and it becomes harder because we have experiences that make things a little more difficult. And so, that's why I guess I'll leave it on this point. That's one of the things I love about youth. And I do work with young people in the film industry. And like one thing I would say is one thing that's really exciting about working with young people is they're so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and excited about the film industry. I fucking love it because that's the whole reason why we're doing this shit. And it's honestly the reason why I've stayed involved in it as long as I have, because I fucking love a good story. And I love acting. I mean, I don't even really act anymore, but I love it. It's so fun. And then to make a movie and to write a script and to tell a story, it's just such a fucking awesome thing to do. And then, there's the older versions of people who are like, oh, I experienced this in the industry. I experienced that in the industry. And I can relate to that. And I get that because a lot of that I've seen myself, or I know someone very closely who has experienced some of these things that they've experienced. And it makes it very hard for people to kind of be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. But I think that's the thing is, if you're going to sustain a game, if you're going to play a game for long, you gotta, as you're in it, the longer you're in it, the more you're going to get both sides of that. And you have to try to find your way back to the medium. Otherwise, there's no point in playing the game anymore. I've almost left the film industry several times. I've almost just said, fuck it, I'm done. I'm just sick of this shit. I don't want any part of it anymore. But I always find my way coming back to it. There's always a calling in me that just wants to come back to it and I don't know if I'll stay in it forever. But what I can say is what has allowed me to stay in it for as long as I have is that the game has evolved in the games that I play and the way that I play the game. So I don't know if this is advice or guidance, but the best thing I can say is whatever game you're playing, learn to evolve with it and play it how you want to play it. And if it just isn't working, go find another game. But if you can make it work and you truly love it and you want to figure out a way, get people enrolled in your game. Because, I do think that we're looking for someone to play the game in a way that we want to play. And sometimes it just takes a visionary or somebody who says, hey, what if we played it this way? And maybe you can change the dynamic of it all and find kind of the flow that you want to go with.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.